Hi guys, are you ready for another emotional and dramatic story filled with betrayal, secrets, lost family, and an unexpected love that refuses to disappear? Today, we are going to explain the story of My Billionaire Patient Is My Baby Daddy, a story about Ella, a kind-hearted woman whose life is completely changed by one cruel deception on her wedding night. Ella believes she is beginning a new chapter of her life with her husband, Arthur. But behind his calm appearance, Arthur has already made a terrible decision. He wants a divorce, and instead of honestly ending the marriage, he creates a situation that will leave Ella carrying a secret she does not even understand. After that night, Ella discovers that she is pregnant with twins. But before she can build the happy family she dreamed of, tragedy separates her from one of her babies. One of the twins is abandoned and eventually found by Fisher, a wealthy and powerful billionaire. Fisher never expects that the little boy he saves will become the most important person in his life. He raises the child as his own, never knowing the full truth about the boy's biological mother or the mysterious connection between them. Years pass, and Ella refuses to give up searching for the child she lost. Her search eventually leads her to Fisher's estate, where fate brings them together again. But there is an incredible twist. Ella becomes Fisher's physical therapist. She enters his world to help him recover, completely unaware that the billionaire patient in front of her is the man connected to the biggest secret of her life. As Ella and Fisher spend more time together, strange clues begin to appear. Memories return, hidden identities begin to surface, and the truth about the twins slowly comes to light. Ella realizes that the family she has been searching for may have been much closer than she ever imagined. So, how did Ella's wedding night lead to 2 children? Why did Arthur betray her? How did Fisher end up raising one of her sons? And when Ella finally discovers the truth, will she be able to bring her broken family back together? Let's begin this emotional journey and uncover the secrets behind My Billionaire Patient Is My Baby Daddy. Ella had always believed that marriage was supposed to be the beginning of a beautiful life. She had spent years imagining a peaceful home, a loving husband, and children who would fill the house with laughter. So when she finally married Arthur, she thought her dreams were coming true. She did not know that the man standing beside her at the wedding had already decided that their marriage would not last. Arthur had become distant long before the wedding, but Ella kept making excuses for him because she loved him and believed that every marriage went through difficult moments. She thought patience would bring him back to her. Instead, Arthur was secretly looking for a way out. He wanted a divorce, but he was afraid of the consequences and did not want to face Ella honestly. On their wedding night, he made a cruel plan that would completely change Ella's future. Rather than speaking to her directly, Arthur manipulated the situation and caused Ella to believe that she was spending the night with her new husband. She had no idea that the man involved was actually a stranger named Fisher. Fisher was not an ordinary man. He was a young billionaire who had been pulled into the situation without understanding the full truth behind it. The circumstances were confusing, and before anyone could explain what had happened, the night was over. Ella woke up believing that something had gone terribly wrong, but she had no idea just how important that night would become. Fisher also left without realizing that this brief encounter would eventually connect him to a family he did not even know existed. Meanwhile, Arthur believed his plan had solved his problem. He thought he could walk away from Ella and eventually end the marriage without carrying responsibility for what he had done. But life had other plans. Not long after the wedding, Ella discovered that she was pregnant. At first, she could hardly believe it. The news was shocking because everything about her marriage had already become complicated. When the doctor confirmed that she was expecting twins, Ella was overwhelmed by a mixture of fear and happiness. She was frightened about raising 2 children alone, but at the same time, she felt that her babies gave her a reason to keep moving forward. She began imagining their future and promised herself that no matter what happened, she would protect them. Arthur, however, did not share her happiness. Instead of accepting responsibility, he became even more determined to separate himself from Ella. He treated the pregnancy as another problem he wanted to escape from. Ella slowly realized that the man she had married was not the loving husband she thought he was. Still, she tried to remain strong because her unborn children needed her. When the time finally came for the twins to be born, Ella's world changed again. She gave birth to 2 beautiful baby boys. For the first time in months, she felt genuine happiness. Holding both children in her arms, she believed that perhaps everything she had suffered had been worth it. She did not know that within a short time, one of those babies would disappear from her life. Arthur, consumed by his selfishness and fear, made another terrible decision. During the chaos surrounding the newborn children, one baby was separated from Ella. The child was eventually left alone on a hospital bench, with no explanation that could possibly justify such cruelty. The tiny baby had no idea why he had been abandoned. He could only cry, waiting for someone to notice him. And eventually, someone did. Fisher happened to be nearby when he discovered the abandoned infant. The moment he saw the helpless baby, something inside him changed. Fisher could not simply walk away. Although he was a powerful billionaire who had everything money could buy, he had never expected to find himself standing beside an abandoned child. He immediately made sure the baby was safe and arranged for proper care. At first, Fisher thought he was simply helping a child in desperate need. He had no idea that this baby was connected to the mysterious woman from his past. He certainly did not know that the child was his own son. While Fisher carried the baby into a new life, Ella was left devastated by the disappearance of one of her twins. She searched desperately for answers, but every lead seemed to disappear. She had no idea where her baby had gone or who had taken him. The pain of losing a child became a wound that never truly healed. Yet Ella refused to give up. She kept searching, believing that somewhere in the world, her missing son was still alive. Years would pass before fate finally brought her close to him again. At the same time, Fisher raised the little boy with love and protection, giving him a comfortable life inside his enormous estate. The billionaire who had once lived only for business slowly discovered a completely different purpose. The child became his greatest responsibility and the one person capable of softening his heart. But the biggest secret remained hidden. Fisher did not know the identity of the boy's mother, and Ella did not know that her missing son was growing up under the protection of the very man who had been unknowingly connected to his birth. Their lives were moving toward the same destination, even though neither of them could see it yet. Years later, Ella's search would lead her to Fisher's estate, where she would accept a job as his physical therapist. She would walk through those doors believing she was simply helping an injured billionaire recover. She would have no idea that inside that house was the child she had spent years searching for, and the man who was secretly the father of both her sons. The greatest secrets of her life were finally beginning to come together, and soon Ella would discover that the family she thought she had lost forever was much closer than she imagined. Years had passed since the night that had changed Ella's life, but the memories had never completely disappeared. She had learned to live with the pain of losing one of her children, yet deep inside, she still believed that her missing son was alive somewhere. Every time she saw a child around the same age, her heart wondered whether it could be him. She had searched hospitals, questioned people, followed every possible lead, and refused to accept that she would never see her baby again. Meanwhile, far away from Ella's world, Fisher had built an entirely different life around the little boy he had found. The child had grown from a helpless newborn into a cheerful young boy, and Fisher had become the person he trusted most. Fisher provided him with everything money could offer: a beautiful home, excellent education, expensive clothes, private tutors, and every kind of protection. But what mattered most to the boy was not the wealth. It was the fact that Fisher was always there for him. Fisher had never planned to become a father, but once the child entered his life, he could no longer imagine his world without him. He gave the boy a name, cared for him, protected him, and slowly became more than just his guardian. He became his father in every way that mattered. Yet there was always one unanswered question. Fisher knew almost nothing about the boy's origins. He knew the circumstances in which the child had been found, but the truth about his biological parents remained hidden. Fisher sometimes wondered why anyone could abandon such an innocent child, but he eventually stopped searching for answers. He believed that whatever had happened before was part of the past, and his responsibility was to give the boy a better future. The boy grew up believing that Fisher was simply the only father he had ever known. Their relationship was strong, but Fisher himself was not doing well physically. Years of stress, business responsibilities, and an old injury had left him struggling with his movement. Doctors recommended physical therapy, but Fisher was not the kind of man who trusted easily. Several therapists had already tried to help him, but none had managed to earn his confidence. Then Ella entered the picture. By this point, Ella had become a skilled physical therapist. Her personal tragedy had not destroyed her ambition. Instead, she had turned her pain into determination and dedicated herself to helping other people recover. When she received an opportunity to work for a wealthy private client, she accepted it because she needed the money and because the position seemed like a chance to improve her career. She did not know that her new patient was Fisher. When Ella arrived at the estate for the first time, she was immediately struck by how enormous and private the place was. The gates opened slowly, revealing a luxurious property surrounded by beautiful gardens. Staff members moved quietly through the halls, and everything looked perfectly organized. Ella felt slightly nervous, but she reminded herself that she was there as a professional. Her job was simple: evaluate Fisher's condition, create a treatment plan, and help him regain his strength. When she finally met him, neither of them recognized the other. Fisher saw only a professional therapist standing confidently in front of him, while Ella saw a wealthy and reserved man who seemed determined to keep everyone at a distance. Fisher immediately questioned her qualifications and warned her that he had no patience for therapists who wasted his time. Ella did not become intimidated. She calmly explained that if he wanted to recover, he needed to follow her instructions. For the first time in a long time, someone spoke to Fisher without fear of his wealth or reputation. That surprised him. Their first therapy session was difficult. Fisher resisted almost every exercise, insisting that some movements were unnecessary. Ella remained patient but firm. She told him that recovery would not happen simply because he had money. He needed discipline, consistency, and trust. Fisher was annoyed by her confidence, but he also realized that she understood her work. Over the next several sessions, a strange relationship began to develop between them. They argued frequently, but those arguments slowly became a form of communication. Ella discovered that beneath Fisher's cold personality was a man who had spent years protecting himself from disappointment. Fisher discovered that Ella was not just another employee. She was compassionate, stubborn, hardworking, and unwilling to treat him differently because he was rich. But there was one thing Ella noticed immediately about the estate: the little boy. Whenever she saw him, something inside her felt strangely familiar. She could not explain why. His smile, his eyes, and even certain small expressions reminded her of someone she could not place. The feeling became stronger each time she saw him. Ella tried to dismiss it as imagination, but a mother's heart does not always need an explanation. She began quietly watching the boy from a distance. Fisher noticed her interest and assumed she simply liked children. He never imagined that Ella was looking at her own son. One afternoon, Ella saw the boy playing in the garden. He suddenly turned toward her and smiled. For a moment, Ella felt as though the entire world had stopped. There was something about that smile that touched a part of her heart she had spent years trying to protect. She wanted to approach him, but fear held her back. What if she was wrong? What if she allowed herself to hope again only to experience another heartbreak? So she stepped away. That night, Ella could not sleep. She kept thinking about the boy and the strange sense of familiarity she felt around him. Meanwhile, Fisher was also beginning to notice something unusual about Ella. The boy seemed naturally comfortable with her, and Fisher had rarely seen him trust a stranger so quickly. Without realizing it, the three of them were already forming a connection that went far beyond a simple patient and therapist relationship. Ella had come to the estate to help Fisher heal physically, but she was about to uncover a secret that would heal a much deeper wound in her heart. The truth about her missing son was getting closer, and neither Fisher nor Ella was prepared for what they were about to discover. As Ella continued working at Fisher's estate, the strange feeling she had about the little boy became impossible to ignore. She tried to tell herself that she was only feeling emotional because of her own painful past, but every time she saw him, something inside her seemed to whisper that there was a connection between them. The boy, meanwhile, became increasingly comfortable around Ella. He would sometimes sit nearby during Fisher's therapy sessions, watching her carefully as she helped Fisher complete difficult exercises. Whenever Ella smiled at him, he smiled back without hesitation. Fisher noticed the growing bond and was surprised by how naturally the boy accepted her. Usually, the child was cautious around strangers, but with Ella, everything felt different. One afternoon, while Ella was preparing Fisher for another therapy session, the boy walked into the room holding a small toy. He looked at Ella and asked her to play with him. Ella froze for a moment. She had spent years imagining what it would be like to hear her missing son's voice, and now the simple request from this child touched something deep inside her. She smiled and agreed. As they played, Ella noticed several small details that made her heart race. The boy had a habit of touching his ear when he became nervous, a habit she remembered from the baby she had lost. Of course, a habit alone could mean nothing, but there were other similarities too. His eyes reminded her of the photographs she had kept from the day her twins were born. Ella had very few memories of that terrible time because everything had happened so quickly, but she remembered enough to know that one of her babies had a distinctive expression. She secretly wondered whether she was allowing hope to control her judgment. She knew that she could not simply decide that the boy was her son without proof. Still, the possibility began to consume her thoughts. Meanwhile, Fisher's attitude toward Ella was also changing. At first, he had considered her too stubborn and outspoken, but now he had begun to respect her. She was the first person in years who could challenge him without being afraid. During one therapy session, Fisher lost his balance while attempting a difficult movement. Ella quickly reached out and supported him. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and neither spoke. Fisher was surprised by how strongly he reacted to her presence. Ella also felt something she could not explain. She quickly stepped back and returned to her professional manner, but the moment stayed in both of their minds. As the days passed, Fisher began sharing small pieces of his life with Ella. He told her that he had found the boy years earlier under heartbreaking circumstances and had decided to raise him himself. Ella listened carefully, trying not to show how much those words affected her. When Fisher mentioned that the child had been found abandoned near a hospital, Ella's heart nearly stopped. She asked him exactly when and where the child had been found. Fisher noticed the sudden change in her expression and asked why she wanted to know. Ella quickly claimed that she was simply curious, but inside, she was trembling. The details sounded dangerously close to the story of her missing baby. She remembered the hospital, the confusion after giving birth, and the moment she had realized that one of her twins was gone. Could it really be possible? Could the little boy she had been watching every day actually be her lost son? Ella wanted to believe it, but she was terrified of being wrong. She decided that she needed evidence before allowing herself to hope. She began quietly searching for information about the child's past without violating Fisher's trust. She discovered that Fisher had never revealed the boy's biological identity publicly. There were no clear records connecting him to a family, and Fisher had always treated him as his own. This made the mystery even more complicated. At the same time, Arthur's past actions began coming back into the story. Ella had spent years trying to forget the man who had betrayed her, but some unanswered questions remained. She had always wondered exactly what happened on the night her life changed. Why had Arthur acted so strangely? Why had everything become so confusing afterward? And why had one of her children disappeared? The answers had been hidden for years, but secrets rarely remain buried forever. Arthur had continued living his own life, believing that the truth would never reach him. He had underestimated Ella's determination. While Ella was searching for her missing son, another person was also beginning to investigate the child's past. Fisher had recently started questioning the circumstances surrounding the abandoned baby. Something about Ella's arrival had awakened memories he had ignored for years. He remembered the hospital, the condition of the newborn, and the strange lack of information surrounding him. For the first time, Fisher wondered whether someone had deliberately hidden the child's identity. He also began noticing how strongly the boy resembled him in certain ways. At first, he dismissed the thought, because he had never imagined himself to be the child's biological father. But the more he thought about it, the more questions appeared. Then one evening, Ella accidentally found an old photograph among Fisher's belongings. It showed the baby as he had looked when Fisher first found him. Ella stared at the photograph and felt the world disappear around her. She recognized the tiny face. She recognized the blanket wrapped around him. More importantly, she remembered seeing that same blanket on the night her twins were born. Tears filled her eyes as she realized that her suspicion might actually be true. She had finally found the child she had been searching for all these years. But there was another truth waiting behind that discovery. If this boy was truly her son, then Fisher was connected to her past in a way neither of them had understood. The mysterious stranger from her wedding night might not have been a stranger after all. Ella left the room before anyone could see her tears. She knew she needed a DNA test, but she also knew that once the truth was confirmed, nothing in their lives would ever be the same again. Fisher, unaware of what Ella had discovered, continued watching her from a distance. He could sense that something had changed. Ella was no longer simply his therapist. She was carrying a secret that could destroy the carefully constructed life he had built. And soon, that secret would finally come into the light. Ella spent the entire night thinking about the photograph she had found. She wanted to believe that her eyes had recognized the truth correctly, but she was terrified of making another mistake. For years, she had searched for her missing son without knowing whether she would ever find him. Now, after all that time, she was standing inside the same house where he had been raised. The thought was almost impossible to accept. The next morning, Ella returned to Fisher's estate determined to remain calm. She knew that emotions could not replace evidence. If the little boy was really her son, she needed a proper confirmation. She quietly arranged for a DNA test, but keeping the secret became increasingly difficult because Fisher was beginning to notice her unusual behavior. During their therapy session, he asked her directly if something was wrong. Ella tried to avoid the question, but Fisher knew she was hiding something. He had spent years learning to read people because his business depended on understanding who he could trust. When Ella finally admitted that she had discovered something about the boy's past, Fisher immediately became protective. He asked what she meant, but Ella could not reveal everything yet. She told him that there might be information about the child's biological family that neither of them knew. Fisher became suspicious and asked why she was suddenly interested in the boy's origins. Ella looked at him and almost told him the truth, but fear stopped her. She was afraid that if she was wrong, she would lose the trust she had built with both Fisher and the child. Fisher eventually agreed to give her time, but he warned her that the boy's safety came first. Meanwhile, the DNA test was being processed. Those few days felt endless to Ella. Every moment she spent around the boy became more emotional. She watched him laugh, study, and play, wondering how many years she had missed. She imagined all the birthdays she had never celebrated, the first steps she had never seen, and the childhood memories she could never recover. Yet she also realized that Fisher had given the boy something important. He had protected him, loved him, and provided a stable home. Ella could not hate Fisher for that. If anything, she was grateful that someone had cared for her son when she could not. Fisher, however, was facing his own growing doubts. He began investigating the circumstances surrounding the abandoned baby. He contacted people who had been connected to the hospital years earlier and discovered inconsistencies in the records. Some documents were missing, while others contained information that did not match the official story. Fisher became convinced that the child had not simply been abandoned by accident. Someone had deliberately separated him from his family. As he investigated further, one name repeatedly appeared in old records: Arthur. Fisher did not yet understand why Arthur was connected to the child, but the discovery immediately made him suspicious. At the same time, Ella remembered how Arthur had behaved before and after the twins were born. He had always been desperate to end their marriage, and his actions had become increasingly strange. She began to wonder whether he had been responsible for the separation. The possibility filled her with anger, but she forced herself to remain focused. She needed proof before confronting him. When the DNA results finally arrived, Ella could barely breathe as she opened the report. The result confirmed what her heart had already suspected. The boy was her biological son. Tears immediately filled her eyes. After years of searching, she had finally found him. But the discovery brought both happiness and pain. Ella knew she could never get back the years she had lost, but she could still be his mother from that moment forward. She also realized that there was another question that needed an answer. Who was the boy's father? Ella already had a strong suspicion, but she wanted absolute certainty. The DNA test confirmed that Fisher was the child's biological father as well. The revelation left Ella completely stunned. The mysterious man connected to her wedding night was the same billionaire who had unknowingly raised her son. Fisher was not just her employer or her patient. He was the father of both of her children. Ella struggled to understand how such a complicated chain of events could have brought them together again. She knew she could not keep the truth hidden forever. That evening, Fisher found her sitting alone in the garden. He asked her once again what was happening. This time, Ella knew she could not run from the truth. With tears in her eyes, she told him that she believed the little boy was her missing son. Fisher stared at her in shock. For a moment, he could not respond. Then Ella explained that she had lost one of her twins years earlier and that the circumstances surrounding the disappearance matched the story of the baby Fisher had found. Fisher immediately demanded to know how she could be certain. Ella showed him the DNA results. Fisher read the report several times, unable to believe what he was seeing. The child he had raised was not only Ella's son, but also his own biological child. Suddenly, memories of the mysterious night years ago returned to him. He remembered the woman he had encountered on that confusing evening and the strange feeling that he had never completely forgotten her. He finally understood why Ella had always seemed strangely familiar. The revelation changed everything. Fisher was overwhelmed by anger toward Arthur, but he also felt guilt for never discovering the truth earlier. Ella told him that none of this was his fault. He had saved their son when no one else had. Fisher looked toward the house, where the boy was playing, and realized that the child had always been his family. He had simply never known the complete truth. But the story was still not finished. Ella had another son, the twin who had remained with her after birth. She had spent years protecting him and searching for the other half of their family. Now she knew where one son was, but she also knew that the boys had grown up separately. The next challenge would be bringing the brothers together and revealing the truth to them in a way they could understand. Before that could happen, however, Arthur would have to face the consequences of everything he had done. His deception had separated a mother from her child and hidden a father from his son. Now the truth was finally coming for him, and there would be no easy way to escape it. After the DNA results confirmed the truth, Ella and Fisher were left standing in a silence that seemed heavier than anything they had ever experienced. For years, Ella had believed that her missing son might be somewhere in the world, living a life completely separate from hers. Fisher had spent those same years believing that the child he had rescued was simply a boy fate had placed in his path. Neither of them had imagined that they had been connected since that confusing night years earlier. Now the truth was impossible to deny. Fisher was the father of Ella's twins, and the little boy he had raised was Ella's missing son. For Ella, the discovery brought an overwhelming mixture of happiness and heartbreak. She finally knew where her child was, but she could not stop thinking about all the years she had lost. She had missed his first words, his first steps, his birthdays, and countless ordinary moments that a mother normally treasures. At the same time, she knew that Fisher had given him the love and protection he needed. She looked at Fisher and realized that despite everything, he had never abandoned their son. He had found him when he was completely helpless and had chosen to raise him. Fisher, meanwhile, was struggling with his own emotions. He was grateful that the truth had finally been revealed, but he was also angry at the people who had allowed the child to be separated from his mother. More than anything, he wanted to know why it had happened. Ella eventually told him everything she remembered about Arthur and the wedding night. She explained how Arthur had manipulated the situation, how their marriage had fallen apart, and how strange everything had become after the twins were born. Fisher listened carefully, realizing that the man responsible had deliberately created a chain of events that affected all of their lives. The more Ella spoke, the more Fisher understood why the records surrounding the abandoned baby had been incomplete. Arthur had wanted to erase the evidence of what he had done, but now the truth was standing in front of them. Fisher decided to investigate Arthur himself. With his resources and connections, he was able to uncover financial records, old messages, and hospital documents that had been hidden for years. The evidence slowly revealed that Arthur had been involved in the child's disappearance. He had arranged for the baby to be separated from Ella and had then tried to make it look like an unfortunate accident. His goal had been simple: escape his responsibilities and ensure that Ella could not easily rebuild the family he wanted to leave behind. Fisher was furious when he learned the full story. He wanted to confront Arthur immediately, but Ella asked him to stay calm. She did not want revenge to become more important than her children's future. What she wanted most was to reunite her family and make sure that Arthur could never hurt them again. Meanwhile, the little boy had begun noticing that something unusual was happening. He saw Fisher and Ella talking privately and sensed that they were hiding something from him. He asked Fisher whether Ella was going to leave the estate. Fisher did not know how to answer. He had spent years protecting the child from painful truths, but now hiding the truth was no longer possible. Ella also knew that the boy deserved to know who she was. She did not want to suddenly claim to be his mother without explaining why she had been absent from his life. She wanted him to understand that she had never abandoned him. The moment finally came when Ella sat beside him and gently explained that she had known about him for only a short time. She told him that many years ago, she had given birth to twins and that one of her babies had disappeared. She explained that she had searched for him for years and had never stopped hoping that he was alive. The boy listened quietly, struggling to understand what she was saying. Then Ella showed him photographs from the time when he was born. The resemblance was impossible to ignore. The boy looked from the photographs to Ella and then toward Fisher. Fisher finally admitted that Ella was telling the truth. The boy became emotional, not because he rejected Ella, but because his entire understanding of his life had suddenly changed. He had always known Fisher as his father, and now he was learning that he had a mother too. Ella assured him that she did not want to take Fisher's place. She simply wanted the chance to know her son. Fisher supported her and told the boy that Ella was part of their family. Slowly, the child's fear began to disappear. He reached for Ella's hand, and she held it tightly, fighting back tears. It was not the perfect reunion she had imagined for years, but it was real. For the first time, Ella could touch the son she had lost and tell him that she had never stopped loving him. Yet there was still one more family member who needed to be brought into this new reality. Ella's other son had grown up with her, knowing only that he had a missing twin somewhere. She had often spoken about his brother, but she had never been able to give him an answer about where he was. Now she finally could. When Ella introduced the brothers, both boys were nervous at first. They stared at each other, amazed by how similar they looked. Then one of them smiled, and the other immediately smiled back. It was as though they recognized something familiar without understanding why. They began talking, comparing their interests and discovering how much they had in common. Ella watched them together and realized that this was the moment she had dreamed about for years. Fisher stood beside her, equally emotional. He had spent years raising one son, and now he finally understood that the boy had always had a twin waiting for him. The family was beginning to come together, but the shadow of Arthur still remained. Ella knew that before they could truly move forward, Arthur had to answer for his actions. Fisher agreed, but he promised Ella that he would not allow anger to control their future. They would handle everything properly and protect the children first. As the brothers continued getting to know each other, Ella realized that healing would take time. A family could not erase years of separation in a single day. But now they had something they had never had before, the truth. And with the truth finally exposed, Ella, Fisher, and their two sons could begin building the family that had been stolen from them. For the first time in many years, Ella woke up without the heavy feeling that something was missing from her life. Her missing son was no longer a mystery. He was alive, safe, and standing only a few rooms away from her. Yet the reunion was not as simple as Ella had imagined during all those years of searching. Her son had grown up believing that Fisher was his father, and suddenly he was being told that he had another parent and a twin brother. Ella understood that he needed time, so she never forced him to call her mother or demanded that he immediately accept her. Instead, she focused on building a relationship with him one day at a time. Fisher did the same. He assured the boy that discovering his biological mother did not change the bond between them. He would always be the father who had raised him. Those words gave the child confidence because he had been afraid that everything he knew was about to disappear. Ella also wanted her other son to understand that his brother's arrival did not mean she loved him any less. She explained that the boys had both been victims of circumstances created by adults, and neither of them was responsible for what had happened. Slowly, the brothers began spending more time together. At first, they were shy and careful around each other. They asked simple questions about school, hobbies, favorite foods, and friends. Then they discovered something amazing. Despite growing up in completely different environments, they shared many of the same habits. They both laughed in the same way, reacted similarly when they were embarrassed, and even had the same stubborn attitude when they believed they were right. Ella watched them with tears in her eyes because she could finally see the connection that had been stolen from them. Fisher was equally moved. He had always known his son was special, but seeing him with his twin made him realize how much the boy had been missing without knowing it. Meanwhile, Fisher's health was improving because of Ella's therapy. His physical condition had once made him frustrated and isolated, but Ella's patience had helped him regain strength. Their relationship had also changed. They were no longer simply patient and therapist. They were connected by their children, their shared past, and the truth about the night that had brought them together. Fisher began opening up about feelings he had kept hidden for years. He admitted that he had spent much of his life believing that money and power could protect him from pain. But raising the boy had taught him that love could not be controlled or purchased. Ella understood him more than she expected. She had also learned that some things in life could not be planned. Their relationship slowly became warmer, but neither of them wanted to rush into anything. They had already experienced enough confusion and betrayal. This time, they wanted everything to be based on honesty. While the family was healing, Arthur began realizing that the truth was about to destroy the life he had built. He received word that Fisher was investigating the old hospital records. Arthur panicked because he knew that if those records were uncovered, his involvement would be exposed. He tried to contact people who had helped him years earlier, hoping they could remove the remaining evidence. But Fisher had already gathered enough information to protect Ella and the children. Arthur's attempts only created more evidence against him. When he finally confronted Ella, he expected her to be frightened or confused. Instead, she stood before him with a confidence he had never seen before. She told him that she knew the truth. She knew that he had manipulated her, that he had wanted to escape their marriage, and that his actions had separated her from her child. Arthur tried to deny everything, claiming that circumstances had become complicated and that he never intended to cause such suffering. Ella refused to listen to his excuses. She told him that he had made choices, and those choices had consequences. For years, she had blamed herself for losing her son. Now she understood that the blame belonged to the person who had deliberately created the situation. Fisher arrived soon after and made it clear that Arthur would not be allowed anywhere near the children. Arthur tried to use their past marriage as an argument, but Fisher had no interest in his excuses. More importantly, Ella had finally found her voice. She told Arthur that he no longer had control over her life. The woman he had once manipulated was gone. She was now a mother protecting her family. Arthur eventually realized that he had lost everything he had tried to control. His plan to escape responsibility had created the very family he had wanted to prevent. While Arthur faced the consequences of his actions, Ella focused on something much more important. She wanted her sons to have a normal relationship. She organized simple family activities instead of expensive celebrations. The boys played together, argued over small things, laughed, and slowly became brothers rather than strangers. One evening, they sat together talking about the future. One brother asked whether they would always stay together now. Ella smiled and promised that no one would separate them again. Fisher quietly watched the scene and realized that his greatest achievement had nothing to do with his business empire. It was the family sitting in front of him. His son had found his mother, his brother had found his twin, and Ella had finally found the child she had spent years searching for. But there was still another kind of healing needed. Fisher's physical condition had improved, but emotionally, he was still carrying guilt and fear. He worried that Ella might eventually blame him for the years she had lost. Ella reassured him that he had saved their son when everyone else had failed. She could never hate the man who had protected her child. Their conversation brought them closer than ever. Fisher finally admitted that he had begun to care deeply for Ella, not because she was the mother of his children, but because of the woman she had become. Ella admitted that she felt the same. Their love had not begun with a perfect meeting or a romantic plan. It had survived misunderstanding, separation, and years of secrets. Now, for the first time, they had the chance to choose each other freely. As the family sat together that evening, Ella looked at her two sons and Fisher and realized that her greatest wish had finally come true. The past could never be changed, but the future belonged to them. And this time, no secret or betrayal would be allowed to take their family apart. The days that followed brought a new kind of happiness to Ella's life, but they also reminded her that rebuilding a family was not something that could happen overnight. She had spent years imagining the moment she would find her missing son, yet she had never imagined how complicated that reunion would feel. Her son loved Fisher deeply, and Ella never wanted him to believe that accepting her meant losing the father who had raised him. Instead, she encouraged their bond and made sure the boy understood that he did not have to choose between them. Fisher appreciated Ella's approach because he had the same fear. He had raised the child since infancy and could not imagine his life without him. But he also knew that Ella had suffered an unimaginable loss. He wanted to give her the opportunity to become part of her son's life without making the child feel caught between two parents. Slowly, the tension disappeared. The boy began spending time with Ella and his twin, and the brothers became inseparable. They discovered that they had many differences because they had grown up in different homes, but those differences made their relationship even more interesting. One had grown up surrounded by wealth and private tutors, while the other had experienced a much more ordinary life with Ella. Instead of allowing those differences to separate them, they became curious about each other's worlds. Ella enjoyed watching them learn from one another. She realized that the years they had lost could not be recovered, but the years ahead could still be filled with memories. Meanwhile, Fisher's physical recovery continued. Ella remained his therapist, but their sessions had become less formal. Fisher had regained much of his strength, yet there were still moments when his old injury caused pain and frustration. Ella taught him that recovery was not about becoming exactly who he had been before. It was about accepting his current condition and becoming stronger in a different way. Fisher listened to her because he had come to trust her completely. One evening, after a difficult session, Fisher admitted that he was afraid. Ella asked what frightened him, and he explained that for most of his life, he had believed he could control everything. His business, his finances, his security, even the people around him. But finding the abandoned baby had shown him that life could change in a single moment. He had been given a child without warning, and now that child had become the center of his world. Ella told him that perhaps not everything needed to be controlled. Some of the most important things in life arrived unexpectedly. Fisher smiled because he knew she was talking about more than just their children. Their relationship had grown naturally, without either of them planning it. They had begun as two strangers connected by a complicated past, then became therapist and patient, and eventually discovered that they were the parents of twins. Now they were learning whether they could become partners as well. But just when their lives seemed peaceful, another problem appeared. Arthur was not willing to accept defeat. He had lost his influence over Ella, and the truth about his actions had damaged his reputation. Instead of admitting his mistakes, he blamed everyone else. He convinced himself that Fisher had stolen the life he believed should have belonged to him. Arthur became obsessed with proving that Ella and Fisher could not create a stable family. He attempted to interfere with their lives by spreading rumors and contacting people connected to Fisher's business. His goal was to create enough confusion to force Ella and Fisher apart. But Arthur underestimated how much stronger they had become. Fisher's business team quickly discovered the source of the rumors, and Ella refused to let Arthur manipulate her emotions again. She had already lost too many years because of his deception. She would not allow him to steal another moment from her family. The boys also began noticing that someone was trying to create problems. Ella did not reveal every detail to them because she wanted to protect their childhood, but she taught them an important lesson. People sometimes make mistakes, and those mistakes do not have to define your future. The boys understood more than the adults expected. They knew that their family had survived something terrible, and they were determined to stay together. One afternoon, the twins were playing in the garden when they noticed Fisher struggling with one of his exercises. They immediately ran over to help him. Fisher laughed as they both tried to give him instructions at the same time. Ella stood nearby, smiling at the scene. It was a simple moment, but it meant everything to her. She had once feared that her family would never exist again. Now she was watching her sons care about their father while Fisher laughed with them. The family she had lost was slowly becoming the family she had always wanted. Later that night, Fisher and Ella talked privately. Fisher told her that he wanted to make a promise. He would never allow money, pride, or fear to come between them. Ella told him that she wanted the same thing. She did not need a perfect life. She only wanted honesty and the chance to raise their children together. Fisher reached for her hand, and for the first time, there was no confusion between them. Their feelings were clear. They had survived the secrets of the past, and now they could finally begin a relationship based on choice rather than circumstances. But Ella still carried one final worry. She wondered whether Fisher truly loved her or whether their connection existed only because they had children together. Fisher answered that question without hesitation. He told her that if the children had never existed, he would still have fallen in love with the woman who challenged him, cared for him, and taught him how to trust again. Ella finally allowed herself to believe that she deserved happiness. The past had taken years from her, but it had not taken her ability to love. As the night ended, Ella looked through the window at her sons sleeping peacefully in their rooms. She knew the journey had been painful, but she also knew that every difficult moment had brought them closer to this point. Fisher stood beside her, and together they watched over their children. Their family was no longer broken by secrets. Yet one final confrontation with Arthur remained, and when it came, Ella would have to decide whether to keep looking backward or finally close the door on the past forever. Arthur's attempts to destroy Ella and Fisher's happiness only made the truth about his past more visible. The more he tried to interfere, the more evidence appeared against him. Fisher's investigators uncovered messages, financial records, and old hospital information that showed Arthur had been involved in the events surrounding the missing baby. Arthur had believed that time would erase everything, but he had forgotten that secrets leave traces. When Fisher confronted him with the evidence, Arthur tried to remain confident. He claimed that he had only wanted to end a marriage that had already failed and that everything afterward had been beyond his control. But Ella refused to accept those excuses. She told him that wanting a divorce did not give him the right to manipulate her, deceive her, or separate her from her child. Arthur finally realized that Ella was no longer the woman he could control with guilt or fear. She had found her strength through everything she had suffered. Fisher also made it clear that Arthur would never be allowed to approach the children without proper boundaries. He had already caused enough damage, and the safety of the twins came first. Arthur attempted one final argument, insisting that Fisher had only become involved because of money and power. Fisher calmly answered that money had nothing to do with the situation. He had raised the boy because he loved him, and he had protected him because he believed every child deserved a safe home. Arthur had been given the opportunity to do the right thing and had chosen selfishness instead. That truth was harder for Arthur to accept than any accusation. Eventually, the evidence was handed over to the appropriate authorities, and Arthur was forced to face the consequences of his actions. Ella did not celebrate his downfall. She simply felt relieved that the truth was finally recognized. For years, she had carried the pain of believing that she had somehow failed her child. Now she knew that the separation had never been her fault. She had searched, hoped, and waited because she was a mother who refused to give up. After Arthur's actions were exposed, Ella finally felt free from the past. She returned home to Fisher and the boys with a lighter heart. The twins were sitting together, comparing photographs from their childhoods. One had albums filled with pictures from Fisher's estate, while the other had photographs of ordinary family moments with Ella. They laughed when they noticed how similar they looked in old pictures. Instead of feeling sad about the years they had missed, they began talking about the memories they wanted to create together. Ella listened quietly, realizing that her sons were already healing in their own way. They did not need to understand every painful detail of the past. They simply needed to know that they were loved. Fisher also began to change. Before Ella entered his life, he had been known as a distant billionaire who rarely allowed anyone to get close. His business had been his priority, and he had built walls around himself. Now those walls were disappearing. He began spending more time at home, eating meals with his family, and participating in ordinary activities. The boys loved seeing their father become more relaxed. They teased him about his serious personality, and Fisher pretended to be annoyed, although he secretly enjoyed every moment. Ella noticed the change as well. She had helped Fisher recover physically, but their family had also helped him heal emotionally. One evening, Fisher asked Ella to take a walk with him through the garden. The place was quiet, and the lights around the estate created a peaceful atmosphere. Fisher told her that he had spent years believing that being strong meant never needing anyone. Ella smiled and told him that true strength sometimes meant allowing people into your life. Fisher agreed. He then asked Ella if she was willing to stop thinking of their relationship as something created by their complicated past. He wanted them to choose each other because they loved each other. Ella's eyes filled with tears. She had spent so long being afraid of love because love had once brought her betrayal. But Fisher had shown her that love could also bring safety, patience, and trust. She accepted his feelings, and for the first time, they could openly acknowledge what had grown between them. Their sons soon noticed the change. They were delighted to see their parents becoming closer. The boys began joking that they were finally becoming a real family. Ella laughed and told them they had always been a family, even when they did not know the full truth. The statement touched Fisher deeply. He understood that family was not created by wealth, blood, or a perfect history. It was created by the people who stayed when life became difficult. As the family settled into a peaceful routine, Ella continued working as Fisher's physical therapist for a while longer. Eventually, His condition improved enough that he no longer needed regular treatment. Ella wondered whether that meant her time at the estate was ending. Fisher surprised her by saying that he hoped she would stay, not as his therapist, but as the woman he loved and the mother of their children. Ella smiled because she knew that this was the beginning of something new. She had entered the estate looking for her missing son and had found much more than she expected. She had found her son, discovered the father of her children, and found a man who truly understood her. The twins had also found each other, and the family that had once been separated by deception was now stronger than ever. Yet Ella knew that healing did not mean forgetting. She would always remember the years she had lost, and Fisher would always remember the day he found a helpless baby alone. But instead of allowing those memories to control them, they chose to use them as reminders of how precious their family was. The final chapter of their story would not be about revenge. It would be about forgiveness, trust, and building a future that belonged entirely to them. After Arthur's actions were finally exposed, the atmosphere around Ella's family became peaceful for the first time in years. There were no more secret messages, no unexpected threats, and no fear that someone from the past would suddenly destroy everything they had built. Ella could finally concentrate on being a mother to both of her sons. Although the boys had been separated for most of their childhood, they quickly developed a strong bond. They spent hours talking about the lives they had lived apart, laughing at the differences between their experiences and becoming fascinated by the similarities they shared. Sometimes they would argue over small things, just like ordinary brothers, and Ella would secretly smile because even their arguments reminded her that they were finally together. Fisher enjoyed watching the boys grow closer. He had spent years believing that his son would never know where he came from, and now he could see him discovering his identity alongside his twin. Fisher also made a conscious decision to give the boys a balanced life. Although he was incredibly wealthy, he did not want his children to believe that money was the most important thing in the world. He wanted them to understand responsibility, kindness, and loyalty. Ella agreed completely. She wanted her sons to appreciate both the comfortable life Fisher could provide and the simple values she had taught them while raising one of them alone. Together, they created a home where the boys could experience both worlds without feeling that one was better than the other. Meanwhile, Fisher's recovery continued to improve. The physical therapy Ella had given him had helped him regain much of his strength, but Fisher often joked that having a stubborn therapist was more effective than any medicine. Ella laughed whenever he said it, reminding him that he had once complained about almost every exercise she gave him. Their relationship had become playful and warm, something neither of them had expected when they first met. Fisher began taking the boys on small trips, while Ella sometimes joined them. The family slowly created new memories to replace the painful years they had lost. One weekend, they traveled to a quiet countryside location where the boys could spend time outdoors. They played games, explored the area, and challenged each other to harmless competitions. Ella watched them running together and felt a deep sense of peace. She knew she could never recover the childhood years they had missed, but she could make sure that their future was filled with love. During the trip, one of the boys asked Ella whether she had really searched for him all those years. Ella answered honestly. She told him that she had never stopped looking. She had followed every possible lead and had continued believing that he was alive. The boy became quiet and then hugged her. He told her that even though they had lost many years, he was happy that she had found him. Ella could not hold back her tears. That simple moment healed something inside her that had remained broken for years. Fisher watched from a distance and understood how important the moment was. Later, he told Ella that he admired her strength. She had every reason to become bitter, but instead she had continued searching and caring for her family. Ella replied that Fisher deserved credit too. If he had not found the abandoned baby, their son might have faced an entirely different life. Fisher admitted that when he first found the child, he had not understood why he felt such an immediate connection. Now he knew it had been the beginning of a family he had never known he needed. Their conversation brought them closer. They began discussing marriage and the possibility of making their family official. Neither wanted a huge celebration simply to impress other people. They wanted something meaningful that reflected their journey. Ella wanted the boys to be part of it, because they were the reason the two of them had found each other again. Fisher agreed. He told her that the most important people in his life were standing right beside him, and he did not need anything more. As they planned their future, Ella also made peace with the idea of forgiving herself. For years, she had blamed herself for trusting Arthur and for not being able to protect her missing child. But she finally understood that she had been deceived. She had been placed in an impossible situation by someone she trusted, and she had done everything she could afterward to find her son. Fisher helped her understand that she did not need to carry guilt for another person's actions. She had already done enough. She had raised one son with love, searched for the other, and now she was giving both boys the chance to grow up together. Fisher also had to let go of his own guilt. He sometimes wondered how he could have raised the child for so many years without discovering his biological connection to Ella. But Ella reminded him that the most important fact was that he had been there when the boy needed him. He had saved him, protected him, and loved him. That mattered more than the mistakes of the past. The boys eventually learned the full story in a way that was appropriate for their age. They understood that adults had made terrible choices, but they also understood that those choices had not destroyed their family. Instead of focusing on anger, they focused on the fact that they were together now. Their relationship became one of the strongest parts of the family's new life. One evening, the four of them sat together for dinner. It was nothing luxurious or extraordinary. It was simply a family meal filled with laughter and conversation. Ella looked around the table and realized how different her life was from the one she had imagined on her wedding day. She had once believed that Arthur would be the center of her future. Instead, the man she never expected to meet had become the father of her children and the person who helped her rebuild her life. Fisher looked across the table at Ella and smiled. He knew their story had begun through confusion and betrayal, but their future would be based on honesty and choice. Their children were no longer separated, and the past no longer controlled them. The family had finally reached a place where happiness did not feel temporary. They had survived betrayal, separation, unanswered questions, and years of pain. Now they were ready to move forward together. But before their story could truly reach its conclusion, Fisher had one final surprise for Ella, one that would prove just how seriously he intended to protect and cherish the family they had built. Fisher's surprise for Ella began quietly. He did not tell the boys what he was planning because he wanted the moment to remain special. After everything Ella had endured, he wanted to give her something she had never received from Arthur, a promise made honestly, without manipulation or hidden intentions. One evening, Fisher asked Ella to join him in the garden after dinner. The same garden where they had once discussed their painful past was now decorated with small lights and simple flowers. Ella immediately realized that something unusual was happening. Fisher took her hand and told her that when he first met her, he had thought she was simply a stubborn physical therapist who refused to let him avoid his exercises. He smiled as he remembered how often they had argued during those first sessions. But as he continued speaking, his expression became serious. He told Ella that their relationship had begun under circumstances neither of them had chosen, but everything that came afterward had been different. He had chosen to trust her. He had chosen to protect her. He had chosen to love her. Most importantly, he wanted her to know that he was not asking her to stay because they shared children. He wanted her to stay because he loved the woman she had become. Ella was deeply moved. She had once believed that love always came with conditions, betrayal, or pain. Fisher was showing her that love could also mean patience, honesty, and standing beside someone when life became difficult. He promised that he would never use his wealth or influence to control her. He wanted them to make decisions together and raise their sons together. Ella accepted his promise, knowing that this time she was making the choice freely. The boys soon joined them, and Fisher revealed that he wanted them to help build their future together. The children were excited when they learned that their parents planned to officially become a family. They had already begun thinking of themselves as brothers, but the idea of seeing Ella and Fisher together made them even happier. The family began preparing for a small wedding celebration. Ella did not want anything extravagant. She wanted something peaceful, surrounded by the people who genuinely cared about them. Fisher agreed, even though his staff initially suggested a much larger event. He told them that this was not a business occasion. It was a family moment. As the wedding preparations continued, Ella experienced a strange mixture of happiness and nervousness. She remembered her first wedding and how completely different everything had been. On that day, she had walked toward a man she trusted, believing she was entering a secure future. She had not known that deception was waiting for her. Now she was preparing to marry Fisher, the man who had unknowingly been connected to her since that night. The difference was that this time she knew exactly who he was. She knew his strengths, his weaknesses, his fears, and his heart. There were no secrets between them. Fisher also reflected on how much his life had changed. Before Ella, he had lived almost entirely for business. He had wealth, influence, and power, but his mansion often felt empty. Then he found an abandoned baby, and that child transformed his life. Years later, the child's mother entered his home as his physical therapist, and suddenly the mystery of his past began to unfold. Fisher sometimes wondered whether fate had brought Ella to him because their family had been separated for too long. Whatever the reason, he was grateful. On the day of the wedding, the twins stood proudly beside their parents. They had become close enough that it was difficult to believe they had once been strangers. Ella looked at them and felt her heart fill with gratitude. She knew that their childhoods had been different, but their future could be shared. Fisher stood beside her, calm and confident, but even he could not hide his emotion. When Ella walked toward him, he remembered the confused stranger from years ago and realized how impossible their journey had been. A single night had connected their lives, but it was everything they had done afterward that had created their family. Their vows were simple. Fisher promised to stand beside Ella through every difficulty and never allow fear or pride to come between them. Ella promised to trust him, support him, and build a home where their children always felt loved and safe. The boys watched with huge smiles as their parents exchanged rings. When the ceremony ended, the family celebrated together. There was laughter, music, and happiness, but there was also a quiet sense of closure. Ella finally felt that she had closed the chapter of her life controlled by Arthur. She no longer needed to wonder why her marriage had failed or why her son had disappeared. She knew the truth, and she had survived it. Fisher also felt that his past had finally been put into its proper place. The abandoned baby he had once rescued was now standing beside him as his son, while the child's mother had become his wife. Their family had come full circle. Later that evening, the twins asked their parents whether they could keep spending time together every day. Ella laughed and promised that they would. Fisher added that there was one rule: they were not allowed to turn the entire house upside down. The boys immediately exchanged mischievous looks, and Ella knew that rule would probably be broken before morning. Everyone laughed. It was an ordinary family moment, but that was exactly what made it precious. They no longer needed dramatic events to prove that they belonged together. They simply enjoyed being together. As Ella looked at Fisher that night, she realized that her greatest miracle had not been finding her missing son. It had been discovering that after years of pain, she could still love and trust again. Fisher had also learned that the greatest treasure in his life was not his fortune. It was the family sitting beside him. Their story had begun with betrayal and confusion, but it had transformed into a story of healing, forgiveness, and love. Yet one final moment remained. Ella still carried a small piece of sadness for the years she had lost, and Fisher wanted to help her finally let it go. He knew that before they could completely close the door on the past, she needed to understand one simple truth. The years were gone, but the future was theirs. And that future was only beginning. As the final chapter of their story began, Ella finally understood that some wounds do not disappear simply because the truth is revealed. The pain of the lost years would always be part of her history, but it no longer had the power to control her future. She had spent so long searching for her missing son that she had forgotten what it felt like to simply enjoy being a mother. Now she could wake up every morning knowing that both of her sons were safe, healthy, and together. She could watch them laugh, argue, study, and make plans for the future without wondering where one of them was. That simple peace was more valuable to her than anything money could buy. Fisher understood this better than anyone. He had once found a helpless baby alone and had promised himself that the child would never have to face the world without someone protecting him. Years later, that promise had brought him into Ella's life. Now he no longer had to protect his son alone. Ella was beside him, and together they could give both boys the love and guidance they deserved. Fisher's physical recovery was also nearly complete. The therapy that had once been a difficult part of his daily routine had become a reminder of how much his life had changed. Ella had entered his estate as a professional therapist, determined only to help him walk more comfortably and regain his strength. She had never imagined that she would leave that same estate as his wife and the mother of his children. Fisher often joked that she had repaired much more than his physical condition. She had helped him open his heart again. Ella would smile and tell him that he was still one of her most difficult patients. Their playful arguments became part of their family life, and the boys loved watching their parents tease each other. One morning, the twins decided to prepare breakfast for their parents. They wanted to prove that they were old enough to take care of the family. The kitchen quickly became a disaster, with ingredients scattered across the counters and dishes everywhere. Ella walked in and stared at the mess in disbelief. Fisher followed her and immediately laughed. The boys proudly announced that they had made breakfast. Instead of getting angry, Ella smiled and hugged them both. She realized that these were the moments she had dreamed about during the years when she had been alone. She did not need a perfect house or a perfect life. She simply needed her family together. Later that day, the four of them went for a walk around the estate. The twins walked ahead while Ella and Fisher followed behind. Ella watched her sons talking and suddenly remembered the day she had first held them as babies. She had been terrified then, but she had also been filled with love. She had never stopped loving them, even when one disappeared from her life. Now she could finally see both of them growing side by side. Fisher noticed the tears in her eyes and gently asked whether she was all right. Ella smiled and told him that she was happy. She explained that for years she had imagined finding her son, but she had never imagined finding him and the man who had raised him at the same time. Fisher told her that perhaps their family had always been meant to find its way back together. Ella did not know whether fate truly worked that way, but she knew that she was grateful for where life had brought them. The past could not be rewritten, but the future could still be beautiful. Arthur eventually became nothing more than a distant memory in their lives. His actions had caused enormous damage, but they no longer controlled Ella. She had forgiven herself for trusting the wrong person, and she had stopped allowing anger to consume her. She did not forget what Arthur had done, but she no longer needed revenge to feel complete. The truth had already been revealed, and justice had taken its course. Her energy now belonged to her children and the family she had rebuilt. Fisher felt the same. He had once been angry about the way their family had been separated, but he realized that constantly looking backward would only steal time from the future. Instead, he focused on the people who were standing beside him. The twins became the heart of their home. They were different in personality, but they balanced each other perfectly. One was more confident and adventurous, while the other was thoughtful and careful. Together, they encouraged each other and slowly developed a bond that could never again be broken by distance. Ella loved watching them grow. She often reminded them that being brothers meant more than sharing the same blood. It meant supporting each other, forgiving each other, and being there when life became difficult. Fisher taught them the same lesson in his own way. He told them that wealth could disappear, businesses could fail, and circumstances could change, but family was something worth protecting every day. Eventually, the family gathered together for one final celebration. It was not a huge event. There were no reporters, no business executives, and no need to impress anyone. It was simply Ella, Fisher, their two sons, and the people who genuinely supported them. During the celebration, Ella looked around and realized that she was no longer the woman who had stood alone after losing her child. She was surrounded by love. Fisher took her hand and reminded her of how their story had begun. They had been strangers connected by circumstances neither of them understood. Years later, they had become patient and therapists, then parents, then partners, and finally a family. Ella smiled and told him that if someone had described this future to her on her wedding night, she would never have believed it. Fisher laughed and said that sometimes the most unexpected stories become the most meaningful ones. The twins then joined them, standing on either side of their parents. For a moment, Ella simply looked at the four of them. The missing child had been found. The separated brothers had reunited. The father had discovered the truth. The mother had finally healed. And Fisher, the billionaire who once believed he had everything, had discovered that his greatest treasure was not his fortune but the family standing beside him. Their journey had been filled with betrayal, confusion, loss, and painful secrets, but it had also taught them that love could survive even the hardest circumstances. Ella had once believed that losing her son meant losing a part of herself forever. Instead, the search had eventually led her to the family she never knew she could have. Fisher had once believed that protecting his son meant keeping the world at a distance. Instead, he learned that true protection also meant opening his heart, and allowing people to love him. Their sons had once been separated by circumstances they could not understand, but now they had each other. And so, after years of secrets and separation, the story finally reached its happiest ending. Ella, Fisher, and their two sons stood together as a family of four, ready to begin the rest of their lives. The past would always be part of their story, but it would never define them again. They had chosen forgiveness over hatred, truth over secrets, and love over fear. And that was the real miracle of their journey. Not that everything had gone perfectly, but that after everything had gone wrong, they still found their way back to one another.